You can start recording is what I was saying. Great. Before we
Juan joining.
Oh, wonderful. Let's let him join.
Yep. Shelley McNulty.
There's Juan. Hi, Juan. He's connecting with audio. Does that mean he can't hear us or he can hear us?
I don't know which end is not working.
Audio. I think that means he can't talk. We'll wait till it's connected.
Hi, Shelley. Haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, we've been missing each other.
Yeah,
But I
come in on Thursday. You go in on Fridays. Oh well.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I think we've got everyone we're going to have for right now. Before we start the meeting, could we have a moment of silence for the community in Uvalde, Texas?
Okay, what happened to her?
Who's her?
How did you, hang on.
We can hear you guys now. Oh, I think he,
Not anymore. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Let's begin the meeting. We'll call to order at, I'm sorry, I'm in full screen and you never can see it.
6:35.
Yep, 6:35 PM Verizon time. And we'll start by, I'd like to introduce Nick Caruso, who I'm not sure what your official title is in at CABE.
It's Senior Staff Associate for Field Service and Coordinator of Technology.
Well, I don't mind that. I didn't remember it. That's for sure.
I have a hard time sometimes myself.
But you're here tonight to speak with us about the roles and responsibilities of board members.
Yep.
And please take as long as you need, because from my perspective, this is the most important thing we have on our agenda tonight.
Well, I appreciate that. I guess given the fact you have other things on the agenda tonight, I am still going to be careful about the time because you get me started, you get me cranked up and I can just keep going for a while.
Okay.
In fact, I guess that was going to be my first question is about how long do you want this to go? Because I'm thinking, we don't do justice to it if it's less than an hour, hour and a half would be better. 2 hours is phenomenal, but I am suspicious that would be a little too much tonight.
Well, how about if we aim for an hour and if we need to, we'll invite you back for another.
Okay, that sounds fair. And then we could target, and what I'll do is start by asking everybody if there's anything in particular they wish to cover. Depending on that, we can see how we can squeeze things in. So
Great.
since you're already sort of on, Rose, why don't we start with you? Luckily, I've got all the names in front of me, which is great because I'm usually terrible with that. But Rose, 2 questions. How long you've been on the board and what you hope to get out of tonight?
So I was on the board for 6 years in the 90s, and then I left for 10 years. So I got on again in 07. So I guess that's 15 years ago. And I'm hoping that all of us get an understanding of exactly what our roles and responsibilities and our limits are. Because sometimes if you haven't been on a board before, it's always surprising when you come on a board and find out, oh, the board can't do that either. I've been in education at several levels, and I kept thinking the one above me had more power, and then I'd go to the one above me and no, it doesn't. So I'd kind of like us to be able to talk about that.
Sure.
May I tell you that not everyone here is a board member? We also have our superintendent, Frank Ola. Our business coordinator is Sally LaHoo. Shelley McNulty is our special ed director, and Sam Roberson is our principal.
Terrific. Welcome, everybody.
Great.
So I'll go on my screen and call people so it's easier to figure out who's next. Mark Becker.
Hey, good evening. I've been on the board for, I think, about 8 years. I have a couple children that went through the school. My youngest is graduating out of 6th grade this year. My oldest went to Parashell a couple years ago. So that was kind of my perspective. I've, learned a lot. I'm, from a education standpoint, being on the board, going through the different meetings and the different processes we've been going through. And, from my perspective, getting just all around more information about being on the board and what our roles and responsibilities are. I mean, one of my predecessors on the board, John Burnham, and, he always had an interesting perspective that our main roles are, overseeing the superintendent in that role and, maintaining a budget and establishing policy. And those are our primary purposes. So, it'd be interesting to, hear your discussion and get a little bit better perspective on that. So,
Terrific. Thank you.
thank you.
Mary Ellen.
Hi, I've been on the board, I think 12 years. And I was able to meet with you because I also serve as our representative to the EastCom board. My interest is a lot about communications and communications through the chairperson rather than individually, that we don't speak for the board as an individual. We speak as a board as a whole, and that communication goes through the chairperson. And I also have on my phone Ann Gruenberg. You won't see her name listed.
Hello, Ann.
Yep.
Repeat that. Yeah.
Now we can hear you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to you too. And
Thank you.
it's good that you're here.
Thank you.
And I've been on the board for 20 something years. And this year has been a challenge in many ways, not just COVID, but in other ways as well. I've had some health related issues. So I have an interest particularly in, keeping the ship afloat, what the board role is in keeping the ship afloat, especially when there are challenging times.
Well, we'll try to, and again, given the time constraint, we might have to come back and deal with that a little more, but because that's getting, after we've learned some things, we could talk about applying it, but let's see how far we can get tonight. Thank you, Ann. And it's good to hear your voice. David?
Yes, hello, good evening. I have been on the Board of Ed back in the 80s when my daughter Helen was in Hampton Consolidated School. And she raised 2 sons. My grandsons went through Hampton Elementary School. And I'm new to the board in comparison to most of the other ones, I guess, because I was only on it for 3 years in the 80s, and I was elected in November wanted to come back and help my community a little bit in my retirement years. I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say tonight.
Thank you. I'm going to go through everybody, even the staff, if you want to just jump in and see what you might want people to hear. It's a small district, so you're right in tune with everybody else. But I'm going to follow my screen. Mark Becker.
You just did Mark.
Oh,
Mark was before David.
oh, okay. The screens are bouncing around now. It's very confusing.
When new people come, yeah.
Matthew Flaggart.
Yeah, hi, I've been on the board for just about 5 years now. I moved into town and was approached and asked to get involved with different things. And at the time, I work in education. I've been a custodian, a substitute, a para, and now I've been a school secretary for the last 6 years. So the Board of Ed seemed like a good choice, so I ran, and I'm just here to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Sally?
Hi, like Matthew, I'm just here to listen and learn, but I've been the business coordinator at Hampton for the last 15 years.
Thank you. Diane?
Yes, I'm a newbie. I'm on many boards in town, but my first time on the Board of Ed. I've learned, I'm learning things. I don't speak often. I listen. If nothing else, we may not all agree, but we do have to respect each other. And that's where I'm at.
That's always very good to practice. Thank you. Juan?
Hi,
Good evening.
been on for 3 years. I'm looking forward to be able to ask some questions and maybe get some answers. I've had to FOI this board and I'm not happy with that situation. I'm the only minority person on the board. And so I was given the job of being the minority recruiter. And when we recruited a person, that person wants to get out as quickly as possible. So I know that there's a problem that maybe others don't see. And I don't necessarily agree with rubber stamping things. And sometimes I feel like this board, not all members, but some of them are just ready to rubber stamp whatever's said. And let's go on and let's not talk and let's not discuss and let's not challenge one another's notions of what the other person might see from their point of view.
Okay, thank you. And we'll try to respond to some of that tonight. That might be better suited for after we've done the bulk of the work and then really get into some nuts and bolts later. But let's see how we do on time tonight. Thank you. Again, some of the Shelley, did we get you before?
No, hi. Yeah, so I'm the director of special ed with the Hampton Elementary School. I've been a director of special ed for 5-6 years. I've been to many, maybe actually 7. I've been to a lot of board meetings. I don't understand all the rules, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you're teaching. And in the future, would probably like to become a board member, in my own town moving forward. So it's good information for me.
Okay, thank you. Sam.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm the school principal. So in some ways, for this information, I'm just getting information.
Thank you. And if we have time to explore the differences in a small district where there's a part-time superintendent and a principal versus a full-time superintendent, because I know sometimes the roles are a little shaded compared to other districts. And I don't know whether that'll come up or not, but it might. Russ?
Hi, Russ Moffett. I've been a member of the Board of Ed in the 80s for 3 years. I had 2 children that graduated from Hampton Consolidated. And I am now a 3-year member since, 2017, I think it was, 18. And my main goal is to serve the people of the town of Hampton as well as the children. That's my main goal, is to stand up for them and represent them and do what's best for them.
Thank you. Mary Ellen, did I get you earlier or are you our
Yes.
last person?
No, he did. Thank you.
Okay, I wasn't sure. All right, so I think we got everybody. I'm going to see if I can share my screen because I have whoever's host is going to have to let me have permission to share my screen.
All right, hold on. Let me see. I got to change glasses now. One of the problems. Hold on. Oh my God, where did you go? Share screen. Hold on, hold on. Chat. No, where is it? I forget where it is.
I think you go to participants
Okay.
and then
the
find
arrow up.
me, and then there's a more. No, it's not more. Well, I can't give permission, but I think if you find me in the participants, you can give me permission to share the screen.
Okay, I'll do the more. And no, now I'm in chat. Hold on. I am not as sophisticated as some on this chat. Rename, allow. Well, it doesn't say anything about waiting room, share screen. I know there's a place to go and I just don't know where it is. Hold on. Does anybody?
Well, you just said share screen. Could you go under there?
No, it doesn't say share screen. I was saying to myself, share screen. Where is that? But it doesn't say that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, let me go over here. I'm sorry to screw it up like this.
All right. I was having trouble logging in, or I'd have been on a few minutes early and might have been able to figure that out ahead of time.
All right.
That's the one advantage of being in person. I usually show up a half hour early and I'm all set to go when the time comes.
And we had decided to go in person, but then we had a little outbreak.
Yeah, it's not gone. My grandson had it last week. One of my colleagues at work has it right now. He's out sick.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Well, I don't know where it is. I will try to figure this out. I know there is. Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. I got it.
All right.
I think. Basic.
Dr. Oler, you also might be able to make Nick the co-host.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Listen, I had enough trouble trying to find a share screen. You want me to make Nick a co-host?
No, we just want to be able to share the screen.
Yeah, I know that, but I don't know how to do that.
Oh,
My point.
okay.
And if I can make Nick a co-host, that might be helpful.
The only other thing I can think of is if you go to where I am on the screen, there's 3 little dots next to a mute button. And I don't see it on mine, but I wouldn't have permission to change things. But if you click on those 3 dots, it might have something.
I can make you a host.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that all right?
That's perfect.
Change host, and then we'll go back. All right, you should be able to do that now.
Here we go. Okay.
Got it?
Yep, I do.
Okay.
And let's, I just have to make sure I have the right one. Let's try this one and see if you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, so, and I just so that you know, because what I find interesting, so many of you that have been on the board and then came back. And in fact, I know you will all feel that the job is very different now than it was back then. I was a board member for 10 years, from 1983 to 1993. And in 93, I came over and started working at CABE. So I've been working with boards. I'm starting my 29th year of doing this work. And it's every bit as much fun as it was 20. In fact, it's more fun now than it was 29 years ago because I have learned a lot since then. But I'm going to do my best to share quite a bit of information in a short period of time. So I may talk a lot or talk quickly, but feel free to jump in, ask questions as we can. As Rose said, we can always decide to come back and continue this later. And again, giving time constraints, it will be more like a presentation than a conversation, which I apologize for because I much prefer when it's more interactive. But I do want to make sure we cover some specific material. Now, you should see a question on the screen. It says, how many school board members does it take to screw in a light bulb? I'd love your responses to that.
Fine.
All of them.
One.
I've heard all of them. It's all of them is these. Is Ann there?
Go ahead, Ann.
Yes.
Repeat it. We were on mute, so you have to say it again.
Oh, okay. So only one, but it has to really want to change.
I like that. That's a different answer. All of them is actually the second best answer. The correct answer is none. It's up to the board to say, let there be light. You are the visionaries, the policymakers, setting the vision of the district, the goals of the district. It's the superintendent's job to decide, is it going to be incandescent, fluorescent, or candle, or whatever, and then designate the appropriate person to screw in the light bulb. And I added that, I got some of this from a friend of mine from the Oregon School Boards Association, because he was brilliant and came up with this great concept. But I added the part about designating staff, particularly in a small district like yours. I mean, I know the superintendent in Hampton is going to do a lot more different things that a superintendent in a larger district probably wouldn't, because they would have more staff to help with that. But it's appropriate for the board to support the superintendent wherever possible, giving him the resources he needs to get the job done. So it's a mutual thing. He may give the directives to staff, but he has to come to you and say, in order to do this, we're going to need this, or we'll need some professional development, or maybe it's a different staff person or something. And then you mutually sort of work out those kinks and make it happen. And then it's up to the board to evaluate the quality of lighting. And so there are times when, and I would hope often in your board meetings, you're talking about student achievement and you're sort of getting you're catching up on, here's where we are, here's what we're doing. This was our goal. We said we were going to do this. Here's how we've made on progress on that. And so that we spend really a good part of our meeting time discussing the work that we are attempting to do, and again, since the purpose of a school district is to teach children, I hope that you're getting to spend time on student achievement. I think it's really important to do that. So I like to do this to represent to you how important your work is, because in Hampton, there's about 90 little smiling faces in your school whose entire future is going to depend on what happens in that school. And I don't say that loosely or sarcastically. We know there's plenty of evidence that a successful school experience is equal to a much greater chance, let's say, to a successful life experience, that the reinforcements and the tools you're giving children, even from elementary school, they carry with them forever. And if they've got a good school experience, there's much greater likelihood that the rest of their life's going to be better as they go into high school and as they go into college, the job market, whatever they do from there on starts with the reinforcement they get from you. You teach them how to read. Reading is one of the most fundamental things that they've got to have as a skill going forward. So I do this always to remind you that when you're making decisions, and I know several of you said this, I'm here for the kids and for the community. This is it. This is where the rubber meets the road. These are the children who you are doing all this hard work for. And I know that your community appreciates it, and just hope you'll keep that in focus. I'm throwing a couple quick things to think about before we get on sort of the actual legal responsibilities. A while back, not too long ago, I was reminded of the Eisenhower matrix, which is a great way of talking about how a board spends its time. And in this, there's 4 quadrants. Something's either important or it's unimportant. It's urgent or it's not urgent. And I think you would probably have a good guess where you'd want to spend most of your time. Excuse me. But it's the category for important and urgent, that's stuff that can't wait. And typically that's more tactical in nature. It's action oriented, and that's usually something your superintendent is going to be focusing on. The superintendent is the one that's got to sort of deal with the things as they pop up. And sometimes when it's appropriate, coming to the board and saying, I need some help on this. Either the board has to make the decision or has to provide resources or reallocate resources, but I need your help. But that's really the domain. When it's there, you have to do it. If it's not urgent and it's important, that's where the board kind of comes in with setting vision. Let there be light. Let there be a plan. We don't have to do it immediately. We get the luxury, if you will, of looking a year, 2, 3 years down the road and starting to create the initiatives that are going to improve schools long-term. Because the reality is that decisions you make today may not actually affect children's learning till a year or 2 down the road, depending on what that is. It might be a new math program and it takes time to implement it, to teach the staff the new curriculum and the new teaching styles in some cases. And so we may not see real improvement for a year or 2. And if we know that up front, that's okay. But it's helpful to understand that that's really where the board can have a major impact on future generations. If it's unimportant and urgent, well, that often is the place where things go to die. And that's part of I think what I'd say is board members have to be ready to say, no matter how urgent it is. And remember, when someone's calling you or you see it on social media, there's this big, huge problem. That's urgent. It's something we have to deal with, but you have to kind of collectively figure out, is this important or is it not? Do we need to take our superintendent's time up with this? Do we need to take the board's time up with this? It might be something that we want to look at down the road when things have calmed down, but not to immediately be drawn into something just because it's urgent. It might not be the time to deal with it. If it's not urgent and unimportant, always ask yourself, do we really need to do this? And often the answer will be not really. Ask yourself, why are we doing this? Well, we've always done it that way because we're creatures of habit, but it's okay to challenge everything you do on an agenda and say, is this something that we have to do, or is it something that we want to do? And maybe they're not the same. I'd also say since COVID, this has really gotten screwed up because everything is urgent and everything is important. And I've heard from, in fact, I'll give you an idea how serious this is. I am a contributor to School Administrator Magazine. It's a magazine that goes out to all superintendents in the country. And at the back of every issue, there's a section where they have a listing of all the new people who have taken a job as a superintendent, those that are retiring, those that sadly have passed on. And usually they'll each take up about maybe 1 column inch of space. There's not a lot of change, but there's usually maybe a 1 column, the length of the page, split up between all of those roles. I saw an issue not too long ago where they had a 1.5 pages of retirements. 1.5 pages of retirements. And what I hear from a lot of superintendents is, I didn't sign up for this. I don't need to be a biophysicist or an immunologist or any of those things. I'm an educator. I want to teach kids. And here I am worrying about contact tracing and all these other things. And it's put a real strain on superintendents. And so it's not uncommon to see them retiring or trying something different. And so it's important to understand what your superintendent's going through and kind of give, in this case, him his space to do what's got to be done and be supportive, because it's a rough time to try to continue teaching and learning, especially when, like, well, you're right in the middle of it again. We don't know where the kids will be tomorrow, how long they may be distance learning. We're shifting gears constantly, and it's a real strain. And so we all have to have a little patience. A month ago, I was talking about how we could start thinking about the light at the end of the tunnel, but it appears that that was premature. And we're still going to be facing, disruptions and changes constantly for a while longer. And so I appreciate the need to be the board, but recognize that right now the dynamic is not the board oversees the superintendent and that's it, as much as we got to trust you to do the work. Please let us know how we can help while maintaining your leadership role. I mean, it's a complicated arrangement right now, but be sympathetic to the idea that everybody's going through a lot. One last thing I want to share with you, the book School Board Leadership in America was kind of an interesting read. It was actually printed in the late 50s on school board leadership, and it was written by the first executive director of the National School Boards Association way back then. And I found a copy on Amazon for $3 used not long ago, so I actually read it. And what fascinated me, first of all, was how much things have not changed. That there are still a variety of challenges that have never been fixed or we're still dealing with. And while all of you that have been on and have come back may see things very differently than they were, we're still dealing with a lot of the same problems that we did. We're still having the same conversations, even on things like educational technology, which we were thrust into without choice over the last couple of years. We're still questioning a lot about what we've done and how we could do it better. So we're having a lot of the same challenges. In the book, there was one quote, which I really like when I think of school boards and school board members. And it was by the Marquis de Lafayette. I read, I study, I examine, I listen, I reflect. And out of all this, I try to form an idea into which I put as much common sense as I can. I love that when I think about problem solving and decision making, because we can get inundated with data. We can overthink something once in a while. We should always question until we're ready to vote. But sometimes there's a speaker named Simon Sinek who does a lot of speaking for businesses, but his work also reflects well for nonprofits and for school districts. But he makes the reference to the idea that the part of the brain that actually makes decisions, that clicks and says yes or clicks and says no, is not the part of the brain that analyzes data. And so we all will face making decisions a little bit differently from each other, depending on how our left brain and right brain sort of interact, and we analyze the data but reach a conclusion. Some of us are more data driven, some of us are more feeling driven, and we can drive each other crazy when we don't think the same way. But we have to acknowledge that sometimes people do think a little differently. But always think about the common sense part of it, because that's critical. Now, I just shifted screens and it says legal responsibilities of board members. Does that show up on your screen? And now it should say the Constitution of the state of Connecticut. It does not. Okay, so what I'm sorry, somebody, you're not saying, okay, so I'm going to stop screen sharing.
No, it doesn't.
All right, we're going to stop screen sharing, and then we're going to screen share again. Now, do you see a screen that says Constitution? Okay, great.
Yes, I do.
We're on target. So what I've done to try to help people, because the question came from several of you, what are our responsibilities? And so I went right back to state statute and the state constitution, because there are actually, the State Department of Education prints a book that's about 450 pages long that is nothing but state laws that govern public schools. 450 pages of laws that tell you how to do your job. Now, I'm not going to try to in any way share all of that with you tonight. It's an interesting read. You can download a PDF version of that from the State Department website. It's hard to find, but I think it's called 2017-Education Laws is the current one. They're a couple of years behind. And I understand they're not printing the hard copy anymore, but I haven't seen that to be sure. But anyway, I want to start with the state constitution because it's an interesting concept. And because these are laws and because they're important and some of the screens may be too small, I'm going to read them. And we call it death by PowerPoint for a reason, but I'm going to read them anyway because I think the words are important. And the Constitution says there shall always be free public elementary and secondary schools in the state. The General Assembly shall implement this principle by appropriate legislation. Now, when I first saw this, it caught my attention that, number one, it's the state constitution. It's not the federal constitution, and it's not local town charters. It's state law that says there shall be free public schools. The federal government, when they debated the US Constitution, talked at length about education. I know Adams and Jefferson in particular wrote extensively on the importance of education and the necessity of it in a democracy. But of course, we also have to recognize the target audience for them was a different target than the one we've got. Jefferson actually said in one of his writings that the purpose of public school was to separate the genius from the rubbish. Those were his words, not mine. And the idea was that we only needed 10% of our population to be well educated because they ran everything and everybody else was a laborer. And of course, we know that's not what happens anymore. And so we have to be able to provide more and more and more. The second part of this that's important is that it's the General Assembly that was given the authority to implement that. So it's, again, state law that the General Assembly is responsible for free public secondary, elementary and secondary schools. And now they didn't stick to that. They came up with a statute very quickly that is actually several pages long. And this is just basically the first paragraph, but I think it's telling as to what your roles are. Number one, each local or regional board of education shall maintain good public elementary and secondary schools. You may have run for the school board for a variety of reasons. I've heard hundreds of different reasons why people ran for school boards, but in the state's mind, first and foremost is your job is to maintain good public elementary and secondary schools. That's the role of the Board of Education. Now, you can disagree about what good means, and that's where we have some interesting debates, but the statute's pretty clear. Your job is to maintain good schools. Implement the educational interests of the state. You may be elected locally. You may be, and in one sense, sometimes regionally, because your high school is regional. And so those children are impacted by a couple different boards. But the state, in the state's eyes, your job is to implement the educational interests of the state. Now they're defined in, and I'll share with that in a second because it's not too complicated. But you're a state agency, and the State Board of Education, the Commissioner of Education, and the state legislature have authority over you. And there are rare occasions where the state can say, we do not believe that you are implementing the educational interests of the state, and we are going to either assign someone to govern you, or we are going to take your authority away and give it to someone else. And they've done that, both of those, a couple of times. They've had special masters and receivers in a couple districts, and they have removed a couple boards, Hartford and Bridgeport, over the years. Although in Bridgeport's case, there was a lawsuit and they got it back. It got very messy, but that was the state making the determination that you were not implementing the educational interests of the state. And other really important language, when you have town agencies that are trying to tell you what to do, provide such other educational activities as in its judgment will best serve the interests of the school district. So the bottom line is the Board of Education determines whether something is in the best interest of the school district, and you have the authority to make those decisions. Now it gets complicated with money because you are not the funding source. We'll talk about that in a second. But in terms of your decisions, they may complain about it, they may argue with you about it, but you make the decisions that you believe are in the best interest. You prioritize. Those educational interests of the state very quickly. And of course, they have language shall include but not be limited to, so they can throw a whole lot of other things at you. But the first one is each child shall have for the period prescribed. Well, let's just go to the two important words, equal opportunity. You have to provide children equal opportunity to receive a suitable program of educational experiences. So as children come to us with different needs, with different expectations, different skill sets, part of your job is to ensure that every one of those children receives what they need to have that suitable program of experiences. And that is mirrored in both state and federal law. Special education is an offshoot of that, handicapped education for those children with physical needs as well. It is part of your obligation under state law to do what you can to provide the resources for those children. Secondly, well, let's talk about how screwed up school funding is, because this is a time of year when everybody is in the middle of a sometimes brutal battle between your budget and the community. And so if we understand that the obligation is to provide the education, and there are certain obligations in each district that you must provide services, obviously, if we don't have enough money, we can't do everything. We will end up doing the things that are mandated and perhaps not doing some of the other things. And so the state has a formula, and they have a minimum budget requirement, which is the how much you are supposed to fund as a community, your schools. And it's based on a sliding scale, and it's based on the need of the community. It's on the children. It's based on the ability of the community to pay. It's based on a whole variety of things, your placement in relation to other communities, the wealth of the town, et cetera. Complicated formula, it spits out a number, and that's the minimum you're supposed to come up with. Unfortunately, two things. One, most districts in good times think of that as a benchmark. This is where we start, and let's do the best we can to give everything we can. And when times are tough, and I would say this is one of those times, it becomes the target rather than the benchmark, the place we start. Now, the reason this is critical right now is because back in 1985, the state of Connecticut passed the Education Enhancement Act. At that time, if I remember the statistic correctly, and it's been a long time, I was a board member back then, and so we were right in the middle of this, the average teacher salary or the average school experience of incoming teachers was below grade level, or I'm trying to remember the statistics specifically, but basically, most teachers coming into education graduated in the bottom third of their graduating class. That was what it was. We had a problem. Teachers were low paid. The majority of teachers, I think, did it because they loved it, not because it was the right pay, but we were losing, especially as the importance of math and science started to come up, and more and more focus on special education, where specialists had to be in, and frankly, they could make more money in private business. And so the state recognized we had a real problem. And so they developed this Enhancement Act with the promise that if you reopen your teacher salaries, if you negotiate higher salaries so we can get better teachers, we'll pay for it. That was the sort of broad promise. Their promise was they would fund 50% of education spending through state funding. So you would come up with the need, and then 50% of that, and again, that's average. Some districts would get more, some districts would get less, but they would fund 50% of the whole thing. That never happened. So over the years, that has been a moving target, and it's never been 50%. It was in the 40s once in a while, sometimes in the 30s. I think it might be in the high to mid 30s right now. And the needs haven't changed, and their expectations haven't changed. In a minute, you're going to hear about the word mandate. And there's a bunch of those, and each of those has to be done. And so as all of these burdens on the district have risen, professional development expectations, there's always, you're going to have X number of hours of this new professional development or that professional development. All of these things are drains on resources. And so there's less and less money and more expectations. So you're between the big rock and the big hard place. You have to start thinking of this as a resource problem, not a spending problem. Yes, you solve the problem by spending less, but the reality is you're not spending too little or too much. And the reason we don't have enough is not because of the largesse of the Hampton Public Schools or the Connecticut, all the Connecticut boards of education. It's because the expectations don't meet the resources. And so you if nothing else, I would like you to approach this as, we don't need to apologize for doing our job. You know, your role is to determine what we need. And then obviously work collaboratively with the town government to figure out what you can afford. But if you're not identifying the needs, no one will. Your advocacy for the children is really important. Secondly, and also very important to understand, and I hope I'm not saying stuff that everybody already knows, but just because I know that at least one of you is relatively new, let's just do it once. Special education costs. Now, when those laws were written in the mid 70s, there were far fewer issues to be identified. So there were far fewer children identified as special needs and required to be served. And there were very few legal expenses related to that. And when the government passed laws determining your obligations to provide these services, besides the rather stringent process for identifying children and providing the resources, was also the fact that the federal government was going to fund 40% of special education costs. That was the promise that all of this was based on. Now, can anybody raise a hand if anybody thinks that they are at 40%? Okay, how about 20%? Well, I'm going to go to 5% now, and I guess that's probably where we'll start seeing some hands. The last number I heard was that nationally, it may have actually gone up to about 15, 16%. It was down around 7% for most of the time, but I think with a lot of the federal money being pumped into schools, it's sort of gone back up to about 15%. But in Connecticut, up until some of that money flowed to us, it was about 5%. So the costs have gone way up. The amount of money coming in has been a dribble. And those are things you must do. You are not given the choice. So the mainstream programs often end up taking the hit because you can't get more money. Now, there are a couple things along, it's complicated, and I hope I'm not rushing through this too fast, but one thing, legal costs. You know, the way the law is written, if a parent challenges any part of their placement and is successful in winning any part of their complaint, you pay all their legal expenses. And so there are a cadre of school law attorneys who are very good at special education law, and they're going to find that one thing that they win. And so you pay the legal expenses almost always when it comes to special education. And those can be incredibly expensive. Secondly, and oh my, I'm going to forget the second one. In interest of time, I'm going to stop. But there was another thing that made it more complicated again. And it's something that you all have to face. And again, so that you understand that the resources have been the problem and the obligations to do this work. And I have rarely, I can't say I've never, but I've rarely seen a Board of Education, and certainly not in the last 20 years, I've never seen a Board of Education willingly overspending a budget. They're doing the best they can. Your business manager, your superintendent are working as hard as they can to figure out how to get the most we can for the kids. But it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. Before I go on, anybody have any questions so far?
I have a comment.
Okay.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Sure, please.
It's Russ Moffett. It seems to me like we don't have a choice in anything other than serving our town with the state looking over us and making all the calls. I mean, if you don't follow by the state guidelines, you're basically screwed. That's the way I see it. You keep saying the state, the state, the state. So the state is mandating everything that we do. And if we don't like it, then we're out of luck. Get out. We'll replace you or put somebody else in that's going to follow what the protocol that they institute to us. That's the way what you're saying.
And you're not totally wrong. And I hope we'll have some time to talk about where the board can make a difference and does make a difference, because you do have, when it comes to things like curriculum, yes, there are state standards, but boards can require more. You have some control over what's taught within the spectrum of what's mandated. But there are places, in fact, I will say that for a school district to fly, to do really, really, really good, it only happens if you have an effective Board of Education making good decisions. So yes, it can be very disheartening, and I get frustrated sometimes when I see all these laws as well. But there, you have some latitude. We'll try to cover some of those as well, Russ, but you're not wrong in feeling
Well,
frustrated.
it seems to me like what you're saying is the state is involved in everything, and they're the ones who have the last say in everything. If you don't follow state mandates, basically, whether you're a rich town or a poor town, the richer you are, the more they're going to take from you. So we don't really have too much choices as a board member, according to the state, what you've been saying.
So far, that's very true. I'm stressing right now the things that you have to do, but I want to sort of segue into some of the things that can make it better for you.
That's just what I'm saying. The things that we have to do. by their
Absolutely.
guidelines. Yeah.
There's a guy named Jamie Volmer. He's a, well, he goes around the country talking about school governance, and he keeps up a list. And he started it in, I think, the 1930s or something. And every year on a national level, basically, new things are required of school districts or public schools. You know, it might be a different kind of professional development, might be a different kind of service to children. You know, adding things like social, emotional well-being, mental health, nutrition, all the things that have been added over the years. And the list grows longer and longer and longer. But what has never gotten longer is the school day or the school year. So again, we're cramming more and more stuff into a school year, into a school day, but we don't have the latitude to increase that. And so it is very frustrating, very, very frustrating.
Who's the ones who's introducing all that? Who's the one who's making us follow those rules? The state.
Legislators.
Well,
it's very important to if you have a connection with your personal state representatives, it's important every year to get involved and help them understand the error of their ways when they do something that is, there's often unintended consequences. Let me put it that way. Their intent is always really a positive one. They want to do something that's better for kids, but they don't always think it through to what happens to, you know, if I'm solving a problem just for Hampton, you have a problem in Hampton, you've gone to your state rep and say, if you do this for us, it will help us. That's great. You want to have a state rep like that. But what happens then is maybe 160 other towns are negatively impacted with the law that helped you. And so we spend an inordinate amount of time during the legislative session. We have a couple staff up there full time, as well as a whole bunch of board member volunteers. And Grunberg's always been one of those, very prominent up at the Capitol, sharing with them our concerns when we think something's going to go overboard. So you're absolutely right. But I don't want to scare you off completely, but I do want people to understand that sometimes your role is limited so that you don't get caught up doing something that's going to get you in trouble, but rather let's talk about where the lines of demarcation are and how you can make a difference, because you can make a difference and a good one. The other, real quickly, I want to get through these educational interests of the state. Basically, in order to make a statewide resolution to the Sheff versus O'Neill case, which was actually specific to Hartford, they added language that you have to provide opportunities for students to interact with students and teachers from other racial, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. And that looks very differently depending on where you are. I'm sure Hampton has a very different type of program than you might see in Wyndham or Norwich, for example. But that's something your administration is always working on, and I'm sure you get reports on that periodically or part of the budget in terms of what we're doing. There's a thing that you might want to look up on the State Department website. Actually, it's their EdSite, edsight.gov, I believe. EdSite is a website that the State Department of Education put up to share a ton of data. And within that, each district has what they call a strategic school profile. And within that profile, they share a whole bunch of information that is about your children, about your district, et cetera. And that's can be a very helpful thing to look at and to pay attention to. One of the things you must report in that profile is what activities you're doing to satisfy this part of the interest of the state. And finally, mandates. I mentioned the word before. You are obligated to adhere to mandates, particularly the ones pertaining to education within the jurisdiction of the State Board of Education. And the word they left out is unfunded because they don't pay for this stuff. You do. And sometimes there may even be the promise, oh, well, in order to get this going, we will pay for it, but that funding slowly but surely disappears and you're stuck with the mandate. So we are constantly battling to keep as many mandates out of your way as possible. And in fact, we're spearheading this year a special committee that's going to be once again looking at mandates to see what they can pull away and to remove. And they've done that over the last couple of years. So it's not always a futile exercise, but sometimes it feels like it. Now, I mentioned before, the law says you have to provide good schools, but we can all disagree on what good means. And along the way, our state legislators don't trust us to always know what good means. So they have included much language in that 450 pages about what they think good means. So for example, you have to provide adequate books, supplies, materials, equipment, staffing, facilities, technology. You have to equitably allocate them amongst your schools. In your case, you're a single school, so it's a little different. But if you were a district with more than one school, you'd have to make sure that the resource allocation is pretty even. And then finally, to provide a safe school setting. That means a whole lot of different things. When this law, sadly, it's kind of coincidental that this law was added around the time of Columbine because they were concerned about school safety. Sadly, we've seen this again, but it's also increased to include the social, emotional well-being of children. There's an acknowledgement that children that are experiencing trauma, for example, have a very hard time learning. And so there is a requirement to sort of emphasize that and consider that part of a safe school setting, bullying, all those types of things. Policies. One of your major obligations and the way you govern your school districts, because you are a governance board, you govern through policy. Your policy manual is the law of the district. And, you know, Russ, in case you're asking the question in your mind, there's state laws and your policies can't be inconsistent with state law. So if a law changes, our policy department is out there immediately looking at the changes in laws and then sending out to our districts, here's what the recommended language looks like to change your policy to comply with state law, the new state law. So there is an obligation when the legislature ends to review policies to make sure that you are still consistent with the new laws where they've been changed. We do that for our members. And so you don't have to necessarily do that, but you do have to make sure that your policies then reflect those changes. So we'll send you the information, but then you have to sit back, review them, and make sure they meet your needs. And in fact, a lot of the things you're seeing on the screen here, discipline, attendance, youth suicide, reporting of bus complaints is not call your school board member and have them fix it for you, by the way. But there should be a process outlined in your policy manual about how bus complaints are reported. And so this becomes our legislative strategy in many cases, because originally the language is probably something like, you must do this. So their initial language is often, you have to have a mandate. They're going to solve the problem by telling you what to do. And so we will go to them and say, and often very successfully, you know what, that has unintended consequences for many school districts. If we implement the law as you've written it, could you change it to require the board to have a policy related to this? That way the board can implement a policy that makes sense for them. The needs of Hampton are going to be dramatically different than the needs of New Britain, for example. And so that's a challenge for us, but it's one that we take on every year, because if you got all the mandates that were proposed every year, it would be even more challenging than it already is. So policies are really important, and it's the way you decide what you want your school in this case to look like. Now, you hire a superintendent of schools. And I noticed on your agenda that it sounds like you're going to be looking for a new superintendent soon. Frank, sorry to see that. You've been around a long time. I hope you're going somewhere else, but or maybe you get a chance to finally retire. I don't know. But anyway, you have to have a superintendent of schools, and the state calls that person the chief executive officer, has executive authority over the school system and the responsibility for the supervision of the school district. This is your only employee. Everybody else, well, the contract is always between the board and employees, but the one you hire and evaluate is the superintendent of schools. He is the person charged with running the school. That again, policy is the way you govern. The most important thing you do as a governance board is to hire and evaluate the superintendent. That is the most important thing that you do. A good superintendent will make sure things get done, will be legal, will be highly effective. I mean, the size of your school, if you do things right, you can do an incredible job, because with just 90 kids, you can really individualize instruction. You can reach every child and teach them the way they learn. I mean, it's an incredible opportunity in a small school. Sometimes the resources to do that are tough because you're a small school, but everybody knows everybody, and there's a huge advantage to that. The board has to evaluate the superintendent annually. I was in a district very close to you one time, and one of the board members made the comment, we haven't evaluated our superintendent in 7 years. And as far as I'm concerned, we don't need to. And what they had to hear that night, not what they wanted to hear, but what they had to hear that night is you have to evaluate the superintendent once a year. It's part of the law. And the other thing that's really important is the process for evaluation is mutually determined and agreed upon or agreed to. You can't unilaterally decide this is how we're going to evaluate the superintendent. You work on that collectively and come up with a process that's mutually agreed upon. Typically, I think boards in general think of this as a way of all of us improving. The idea for evaluation is what can we do better, not how can we ding you until you have enough demerits that we can show you the door. It's about how do we help you get better, which also often comes into how can we be better, because a good board in their superintendent evaluation spends some time on their own evaluation as part of the process, or maybe at a different time of the year. A board self-evaluation can help you work at a more effective level and help you impact what goes on in the schools far more significantly. It's the superintendent's job to make sure everybody else gets evaluated. I'm sure your principal does most of the evaluations, but I'm sure Frank also has maybe content specialists. There would be other people that he would be directly supervising, but my guess is your principal has quite a bit of responsibility in that. But between them, the administrators have to make sure everybody gets evaluated. You don't see those evaluations. That's not the purview of the Board of Education. They are actually privileged material. And other than when your board is in session in a legally constituted meeting and voting, you have no authority. Individual board members do not have authority over anything in the district. It's only the sort of corporate body called the Board of Ed that has authority by voting. And your chair, to some extent, has a slight amount of authority because she can help set the agenda. She can govern the meeting to make sure it's flowing freely, et cetera. May have to sign papers from time to time. I know the one time our district got sued while I was board chair, a sheriff showed up at my front door and handed me a summons. That was not fun. I immediately called the superintendent in a panic and said, what do I do now? He says, don't worry about it. We got it covered. And it was okay. It wasn't me personally getting sued. It was the board, but that was real scary. But it's your knowledge of the process is probably good. So the idea of understanding how teachers are evaluated, not necessarily in the nitty gritty, but that certain teachers, you know, maybe in our district, a third of the teachers got an intensive evaluation every 3 years. And so we'd rotate a third each year to get intensive. And then there was a sort of a less intensive evaluation the other 2 years. If they were identified as in need or challenge, they always got intensive. And so just sort of understanding what happens in an evaluation can help you when you get a report at the end of the year to sort of elaborate, here's where we stood. Half our teachers were met expectations, 2/3 of, a third were exceeds expectations. We had a couple that were challenges, and we've implemented a process for helping them get back on track, et cetera. So understanding sort of the broader idea of what evaluation does, but not the specifics, is really important. Oh, here we go. And I'm going to go to my favorite statute. Yes, we all have to have a favorite state statute. This is mine. I hope it's an eye opener to some of you. I share this a lot, so some of you may have heard this before. But the statute that talks about your funding is kind of an interesting one. I'm going to read it first and then highlight a couple things. But each local Board of Education shall prepare an itemized estimate of the cost of maintenance of public schools for the ensuing year and shall submit such estimate to the Board of Finance. The money appropriated by any municipality for the maintenance of public schools shall be expended by and in the discretion of the Board of Education. Now, I was in the middle of a bloody budget battle the year I first saw this statute, and it helped me incredibly because, first of all, the idea that the legislation doesn't say you shall prepare a budget, it says you shall prepare an itemized estimate of expenditures or of the cost of maintenance. It's an estimate. There is, and I want to remind all of us, when I hear the word budget, I know when I was a board member until I learned this, I always thought of budget as we have a column of what we want to spend, we have a column of what we spent, and if they aren't exactly the same, we were poor budgeters. And in fact, that's what budgeting is. If we are looking at budget as a process, we determine what we're going to spend, we spend it, the columns should be the same because that's what a budget is. Well, you're not a budget, you're an itemized estimate, and things are going to change. If you could spend your entire year's estimate on July 1st, you probably get pretty accurate to the amount that you had. But the minute a family moves into the district with children with special needs, or a boiler dies, or a new curriculum is required to be implemented, or a whole variety of different, or COVID. I mean, that screwed up financing in school districts incredibly, sometimes to the better, sometimes to the worse, but you couldn't think of it as a budget because it didn't work. So it's an estimate. I think it's important that you share this concept with your finance board. I think you share it with your community members. It is our judgment call on where we believe the money should be spent. It is our expectation of our priorities, but that we always understand that as the year unfolds, it is going to change. And in fact, your budgeting process started probably in December. I'm sure your superintendent was starting to put things together into the fall. So by the time the budget's passed and finally completed, we've gone from, let's say, December of one year through the entire calendar year to June of the following year, 15, 18 months of it, from the time we first initialized our thoughts on budget to the time it's actually spent. And if you can think about all the things that have happened in the last 18 months, there's no way we're going to stick to what we thought we were going to do. Things will change. So I think it's important that people understand that in your community. It might help you feel less necessary to apologize for what you're doing throughout the year, and understanding that, yes, we have money in the budget for this, and I still use the word myself from time to time. We did put money in that for that, but the expectation is if we can save some money on that, we would better use that money elsewhere if we have the opportunity. So you have the right to transfer money from one part of your estimate to the other as the year unfolds. Because I remember, again, as a board member, the first time our superintendent came to us and asked us to transfer money from one account to the other, I was the first one to say, you can't do that. It's a budget. And yes, you can. So complicated idea, but it's an important one. I even recommend that the document you give to the town for your spending plan say itemized estimate of expenditures instead of budget or spending plan or anything but the word budget, because then you're setting up the expectations for a process that really isn't appropriate. And finally, again, money shall be expended by and in the discretion of the Board of Education. You make the determination. You can't choose the bottom line necessarily, but you prioritize and spend the money where you need it. And again, you have the right to transfer money. And then at the end of the year, if there's money that you have not expended, you have two choices. You can reallocate it to priorities that maybe you had to cut earlier in the year and sort of bring them back from the dead, or it might be that you end up turning some of that money back to the town. Boards do a little of both, and neither is wrong. In fact, sometimes those priorities you had to cut early on this time of year, but really needed to do them or wanted to do them, gives you a chance to make that up later. And finally, and again, a statute I think is really important for you to understand that, and let's start from the bottom up. If your board makes a decision that is within the board's statutory authority, so you made a decision you are legally empowered to do, and the decision could not be classified as wanton, reckless, or malicious, then you are individually held harmless from personal liability. I can't say you cannot be sued because anybody can get sued, but you will not be held personally responsible if these conditions are met. And so I've seen board members that they've gone out of their way to do something really horrible. I mean, I know one board member that actually, he heard about something in executive session. I'll give you enough information without saying where it was or who it was or anything like that. The superintendent had gone to the board and probably said too much. Your superintendent shouldn't be giving all the details in an investigation because you individually have no authority. And so the superintendent in this case shared too much, gave them the name of a teacher who was being investigated at the high school for something really bad. The board member then went to a PTO meeting and very publicly stated to the entire PTO group, you better watch out for Mr. So-and-so because he's been caught doing such and such. He got sued. He was given privileged information, probably information he shouldn't have even known, but that's beside the point. He got sued. And I understand there had to be a settlement, and because they sealed the records and everything was kept confidential, I don't know what it was, but he got dinged pretty hard from what I understand, because he went out, exceeded his authority and he did something damaging to someone. You need to be very careful when you're saying things, even in public, because sometimes you're saying something not at a board meeting, or you're making, it's not to do with a board decision, but in that role as an employer, you're making negative comments, for instance, about a staff member, or you're deliberately undermining something that's going on in the school. That could be causing harm to the school district, and it could be causing harm to people, and you're not allowed to do that. So there may come times when there's questions, is it okay? And at CABE, we've got an attorney on staff. I've got nearly 30 years experience. And actually, if you count the 10 years as a board member, over 30 years experience working with boards. And so if you're not sure about something, we're thinking about doing this, but we're not sure if it's legal, or we're not sure what the appropriate process would be, please call us. Call our attorney, call me, call Patrice McCarthy, our deputy director and chief counsel. She knows more about education law than anybody. Call Conrad, our senior staff attorney. They are experts in this stuff, and they'll gladly help you understand what the law is and how we should proceed. We get a lot of FOI questions because somebody's always asking, should we have voted in executive session, or should we do this in executive session? Can we do this in executive session, or should it be in public? How do we notice things? All of those questions, excuse me, please call and ask. We'd much rather that than get the call the next day. Last night we did such and such. Is that okay? Oops. You can call the FOI commission. Sometimes that's okay. The other thing I would say is if it's very specific to a specific legal entanglement your district is doing, a particular lawsuit with a staff member, for example, or something, you could certainly call our attorney to get a broad idea, but his advice might be you really need to talk to your board attorney, the one that represents you in court, because they're the ones that have to know what you're doing anyway, and they're the ones that are going to be representing you if you mess up. And so, we can help you with a lot of questions, and our calls are free, so you don't have to, the clock's not ticking. But if it's a very specific legal matter, we may advise you to, and you may decide this really does have to go to the board attorney directly. But we can help you figure out whether that's necessary or not. But should everybody do everything they're supposed to, then you are not going to be individually charged with anything or required to pay anything. There are a couple exceptions to that. I have seen Board of Education members personally fined by the Freedom of Information Commission for willfully and often regularly flaunting the FOI laws. I know in one case, a board got a request for information. They said no. The person took it to the commission. The commission ruled in favor of the plaintiff or the complainant. He then asked for more information. The board said no. This went on 2 or 3 times, and the commission said, you're not getting it. $250 fine per person. And so they were required to pay a fine because they refused to acknowledge that the law existed. That's unique. It doesn't happen very often, but it can. And I don't want to scare you. The FOI commission is the FOI laws are very important laws. The purpose of those laws are to ensure that the public can watch you doing their business. They have the right to observe the board making decisions that impact the schools, impact the community. And so there are some very specific ways that you have to govern yourselves, the way you run your meetings, the way you give access to the public. But the whole premise behind that is that everyone has the right to observe the work of the board going forward. So you are obligated to make your decisions in public. If you go into executive session to discuss something that's privileged, and there are things that you can do that for, you have to come back out into public to vote, for example. And if you didn't, this is a question we often get. We were in executive session, we voted, we forgot to come back in. What happens next? Well, if someone complained to the commission would rule it was an invalid vote. But they wouldn't try to punish you for that. They would basically say at your next board meeting, put it back on the agenda and vote on it again in public. They're not looking to punish people for making honest mistakes. They don't mind punishing people for making deliberate mistakes or malicious mistakes, but they are not interested in hurting volunteers. You're all volunteers. You're doing this out of the goodness of your hearts. Why be punished for making an honest mistake? And they don't see it that way. Their public information officer, Tom Hennick, is often willing to come out and do workshops for communities. He was the chair of a regional school board and is a fountain of information. If you ever have questions that we can't answer, he can for sure. But our folks are experts in FOI, and I'm sure we can help you with any of the questions you might have at any time. So that kind of ends the formal stuff. And I guess I'm going to stop sharing and kind of ask, are there questions? Are there things in particular you'd like to maybe go into more detail on?
Not me, Russ Moffett, but you said, no, don't be scared, but you're scaring me right off the board.
Well, Russ, I don't want to do that. What I didn't say, and I probably should have right up front, is that watching children learn, seeing that your decisions make an impact on the way children go through the schools is one of the most gratifying things you do. And I know that's sometimes hard. I don't hold back on trying to scare you because I don't want you making mistakes that could get you in trouble. But I don't want you to think that your efforts are useless, because they are definitely useful. For example, you determine what happens in your classrooms to a certain extent. Yes, there are mandated curricula, there are mandated expectations, there's a set of standards that you're required to teach to, but you can determine, for instance, the quality of instruction. You can provide resources, good professional development. There are surveys out, or there are studies out there, I should say, that show that if you were given $500 and allowed to apply it to either class size, teacher pay, teacher preparation, or teacher salaries, I should say, or professional development, which one would be the most beneficial to the children? The correct answer is actually professional development, that the more money you invest in quality professional development, the better your teachers will be, the better instruction will be, and the more you're going to help your kids. And so trying to balance the needs of the building versus the balance of the community versus the balance of the educational needs of the children is a challenge. But when you can provide the quality teaching and learning that they need, you got to feel good about that. I'm sure you'll are all invited to the 8th grade graduation every year, or the promotion ceremony when they get ready to go to high school. I'm sure that those of you who get to do that feel really great when you see those kids getting ready for the next step in their life. I mean, those are things that are really, really important. So I'm sorry if I tried to scare you a little bit. I love to make sure people understand that sometimes if you say something inappropriate, it can get you in trouble. But outside of that, be an advocate for the children, be an advocate for the schools. You need to be, they need you for that. And if you're doing that, you can be very proud of the work you're doing.
I could go on all night, but I'm not going to.
I think we probably have a lot of questions, but it might make sense for us to schedule another day so that we can kind of let this sink in and.
Sure.
Yeah.
Happy to do that.
Great. I will email you tomorrow with some dates.
Perfect. Yeah, the sooner the better, because then people have a time to think about this stuff, but not enough to forget about it. And write down your questions, and my email address. I don't know if I have it on the end here, but it's oh, here we go. If I can share my screen one more time. And Caruso@cabe.org. Always feel free to email if you need to. Oh, I didn't hit the button. There. Now, feel free to email if you ever have questions. Happy to answer. Let us provide you as a resource as you need it. But yeah, I'd be more than happy to come out if things have calmed down, come out in person. If it's got to be digital again, that's fine too. It's certainly less travel, but I have to be in Voluntown tomorrow night. So it's going to be one of those weeks where I'm around the state. Again, other questions? I know you have more stuff on the agenda, but I want to make sure you all have a chance.
Nick, I think it's Francola. I think one of the key pieces that you said was that members of the Board of Education are only have power during a meeting at which they make the decisions and vote.
Right.
Outside of a meeting, walking into a school and regardless of whether anybody knows that you're a board member or not, can't just mouth off at people. And so that kind of reckless behavior is not part of what a board member has the right, authority, or whatever to do. Only during a meeting can a board member actually act as a person that has authority within the vote that's being taken. Is that a good summation?
Yes. For example, even to the point, let me give you a real example, because it might be that they're approaching you as superintendent saying, I'll give you a real example. We had a board member one night at a board meeting say, I would really like to know what happened to all our graduates for 5 years out after they've left the high school. Were we successful in preparing them for the military, for college? How successful were they? I'd love to see a study on that. And the superintendent didn't bat an eye and made a note. And then about 3 or 4 months later, came back with a giant stack of paper about this high. And here's your report that you requested. And what's that? I don't remember doing that. that took a ton of work, a ton of effort for staff members to, and we all know we don't have a bunch of people sitting around the office waiting for a new assignment. They all have work they have to do. So somebody had to drop what they were doing to do this research. And as we talked about that after, and as I recommend to boards going forward, and advice to your superintendent, if any of you go to Frank and say, I'd like a study on this, or I'd like a report on this, if it's not readily available, if it's not a printed document, and again, sort of thinking, I don't like to think of the need to, but it's like if it's a document available, it's FOIable, but certainly as a board member, if I have, could I see a copy of that, that report, or could I, the budget document that we got last month or something. That's one thing. That's just providing something that exists. But if I'll give you a real example, and this was a crazy one. There was a district where a board member asked of the superintendent, they had 8 elementary schools, and he wanted a nurses incident report, all of the nurses incident reports for that school year from the 8 elementary schools. And the superintendent was expected to provide that. And of course, they couldn't provide that in a timely manner, because if you have to provide medical information, all of that has to be redacted. So somebody actually had to go through and pull out any identifiable information. And it took about a month to do it. And part of their policy was that requests for information had to be responded to within a week, I believe it was. And so the reason I was there was because the board was having this big confrontation, because the board member wanted the superintendent fired because she failed to deliver that information in a week. And so, and the board wasn't willing to do that, obviously. But what we agreed, and this is, I guess, the advice I have to boards and to your superintendent is, when the superintendent was given a request by an individual who does not have authority, even to direct the superintendent individually, that the superintendent should have said, and it would be very appropriate to say, well, it sounds like something that's going to involve an awful lot of work. I suggest you talk to Rose. Let's talk about putting it on the agenda. You can share your concern with the board. And if they vote to make this my work, it becomes my work. Which would also consequently give him the opportunity to share with the board, here's what it's going to take to do it. It's going to take a month. It's going to take 3 people doing nothing but whatever that might be, so that your group employee is not doing all the work for just one person. So that is, and the superintendent was given permission to do that, and the board acknowledged, yes, we should do that. Now, here's the interesting thing. That board member actually had what I would call a legitimate concern. During the prior budget year, it was early 90s or mid 90s, there was a recession going on. They had gotten slammed with their budget and they were cutting everywhere. And somebody came up with the idea, probably not a great one, that we've got 8 elementary schools, we can get rid of 4 nurses and have 4 nurses, and they'd spend the morning in one school and the afternoon in the other school. And that way we can cover all the schools. His concern was that could not have worked well. I'd like to know whether it did or not. And he was and he wasn't a healthcare professional. So him going through all these reports, I don't know what that was supposed to do, but in his mind, that was how he was going to investigate this. And the reality was that it wasn't working well. But if and I think a very appropriate board member question would have been to the board, to the superintendent, we did this last year. I've had concerns about whether it's working well or not. Could we get a report at the next board meeting, just bringing us up to date on how effective that has been? Are we covering all the kids, et cetera, et cetera? That would have been an appropriate question to raise as an agenda item through the chair, through the superintendent, and then you'd have time to put together a report and share it. I think that's a good board question. It's holding ourselves accountable for decisions we made last year. But to sort of unilaterally decide, here's the data I want to solve a problem only I'm aware of, is not going to help you get things done. And so I think that's an example where the superintendent needs to be able to say, that's going to require a board decision. Let's put it on the agenda and give you the opportunity. You know, because I think you all have that right to sort of ask for information, but recognize that particularly as budgets, I keep using that word too, as itemized estimates continue to struggle, we don't have people sitting around waiting for an assignment. We just don't. So whenever somebody has to provide you with a document or a research project, or maybe fix something that you as a board have determined needs to be fixed, as you are required to do, that part of our obligation is to also make sure we have the resources to do it. It's not enough to say, we want you to implement those new science standards. You know, a couple of years ago, they had the next gen science standards, which was a different way of teaching science. It wasn't just a new curriculum, but it was also the way we taught it was very different, very hands-on, experimental, and all those other things. So there were a lot of science teachers that weren't expert at that. And so if we were going to do it well, it also meant we had to provide our teachers time to learn how to teach to the new standards. If we just said, we want a new math curriculum, and then at the end, or new science curriculum, and then at the end of the year, well, we had a rough year because we're still in the process of learning how to roll this out. If we aren't asking the right questions, we set ourselves up for failure. We set up the district for failure. We set the superintendent up for failure. We're not giving you the tools you need to be effective. Help us understand what those are. Help us find the way to do it. But ultimately, our job is to enable this to happen, not just to make it, to dictate that it happens, but to provide the resources to enable it as well. That's a very long answer to your question, Frank.
Thank you.
So, Frank, I have a question for you regarding what you said. Are you insinuating that somebody from the board in Hampton is provoked or gone into the school and did what you talked about in this town? I just want to know if that's been happening.
I would prefer not to localize it. I just wanted to know because he gave the idea of hold harmless. And as long as you don't do something that's wanton or reckless, then you can't be held harmless if you do something like that. So if someone walked in and threatened somebody and said, I'm going to take your job, or I'm going to, you know, have this happen, and said, well, I'm a board member, I can say these things. That's a reckless piece that would then become, that person could then be sued, I would assume, is what I'm thinking is what the statute says very specifically, because the only way, and I think this goes back to you, Russ, you guys are a team. You're 9 people, and all of you make a decision, whether it's a 5-4 decision or a 9-0 decision or whatever. You guys make a decision, and only when you are in that mode of decision making do you have authority. You don't have other authorities like a rogue cop or whatever. You just don't have other authorities as an independent person just because you're a member of a board of education. So
let's explore this for a second. If a member of the community, not a school board member, just somebody from off the street walked into a school, first off, they just walked into a school and started wandering around, the likelihood nowadays is they'd probably be shown the door.
Yeah.
And if they refused to, they'd be arrested and shown the door. And if they went into a classroom and started browbeating a teacher or giving them a hard time, or even sitting in the principal's office starting to tell them what to do, they're going to be asked to leave. And if they don't, they'll be more strenuously asked to leave, but they're not allowed to do that. Well, you have no more authority than any other member of the public when you're not in a meeting. So arguably, if you are doing that, then you are not there. I'll say legally, it's probably not the appropriate term, but I do remember one superintendent years ago who had a board member she had a problem with one of their teachers, and she was constantly going into that teacher's classroom and berating her in front of the class. And the superintendent invited that board member into his office and basically told her, if you do it again, you'll be arrested for trespassing. You do not have the authority to do that. And if, imagine for a second, anybody in a leadership position walking into your employees, anywhere within a building, but castigating one of your employees. If part of your job is to make sure that our working conditions are good, then we have to have a climate that doesn't do that. We have bullying policies against students to students. A lot of districts include adults when it comes to bullying. So, depending on the behavior, if it reaches that level where it could be considered bullying, then you're under the same rules that everyone else. You certainly don't have a separate set of rules for that kind of behavior.
Okay, I understand. I understand what you guys are saying. What I want to know is, Frank, you opened up the door on this, and I want to know if somebody from the Board of Education in Hampton, I don't need a name, has been going in there and doing what you said and asked about. I want to know if somebody's gone in there and pushed their weight around as a board member. That it's just something I want to know.
I think judging from the look on Frank's face, I'm not sure he wants to answer that in a public session.
Okay.
But Russ, let me explore that just for a second further, though, because it may be that this board may feel the need to do a board evaluation where we could come back and actually do a self-evaluation, talk about how you work together, you govern together, that kind of thing could be discussed in executive session. And you might have a better, more candid conversation rather than putting your superintendent on the spot.
I don't think it'd be candid.
Mr. Caruso?
Yeah.
Mr. Ola put himself on the spot. I know the person that he's talking about, and this person was never asked to leave the building by anybody. This person was accused of being there every day late, badgering the teacher, walking around, and God knows what. If there's anybody who's up for libel, I think it would be our superintendent at this point, and other things, because they're manifestations of his imagination. And he's already admitted to those things. And he hasn't answered or bothered to answer any FOIs that have been submitted to him. And he's late on those also. So I would just suggest to temper what's going on. And Dr. Ola, I would very, very carefully watch the line you're walking on right now. Thank you.
I guess I would like to bring us back to a broader conversation. I'm not minimizing what your concerns are, or Russ. I guess what I'm thinking about is this is published as a roles and responsibilities workshop. And if we start talking about personal performance of either board members or the superintendent, we're getting into an area that probably needs a different venue. It needs a board evaluation. I'm not trying to step away from having a difficult conversation. I'm not sure this is the appropriate time for it. There might be a more appropriate time for it. That's all I'm suggesting. And I hope you understand that difference. I would suggest if board members have concerns about behavior, they should be working with the board chair to work on some sort of setting something up to have those conversations. And if my help could be perceived as valuable, I'd be happy to do that.
Oh, excuse me, my dog, there's a cat outside and she's barking. But thank you. I'm sure we'll take you up on that offer, Nick, to have that conversation in a separate venue.
Happy to do
Can you
that.
unshare, please?
Oh, I didn't know I still was. I apologize for that.
there
There
you
we go. Hi, everybody.
Hey,
Yeah, and just a reminder, you have to become host again, Dr. Ola.
I have to become host again? Okay. Host to say.
Well, Frank, I just made you host.
Okay, good.
Great. So I think on that note, maybe we should conclude tonight's presentation. But thank you. I learned a lot. I especially appreciated the references to the law. I took lots of notes on that. And I found it interesting when you said it's an itemized
estimate
of spending. Yeah. I wonder what our Board of Finance would think if we put that in on our document.
I've recommended that to boards for years, and I know a number of them do that. They even if they change it to spending plan, taking the word budget out of the equation, because it's not really a budget in the literal sense of the word. Because the target is a moving one. And I say this with no sarcasm. In their infinite wisdom, the legislature got that. They understood that if you could spend it all on July 1st, you could probably come pretty close. But on July 2nd, something happens, or we get COVID and all of a sudden transportation's thrown out the window, and cleaning. I mean, I can't imagine how you change your custodial supplies and all of the things that and scheduling and everything. I mean, it was a madhouse for a while, and there were some positive sides, but needed a lot more substitute teachers. That was a drain. Didn't have to pay the bus company. Maybe that's a surplus, but all this juggling. And if we were under the guise of a real budget, you couldn't do it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. And as I said, I'll send an email to you probably tonight after our meeting, and we can start planning for our next session.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.
You too.
Thanks.
You too.
You're welcome.
Very interesting.
I didn't think Nick would want to stay. But we can move on with our agenda and move to audience for citizens and staff. Is there anyone who would like to say, I'm going to ask too that we hold our comments to 2 minutes, especially since we're getting started later. Is there anyone who has something they'd like to say? Oh, Juan, your hand is raised. Do you have something you want to say?
I do.
Okay, Dana, sure. What's up?
I'd like you to know that the staff of the Hampton Elementary School has been very supportive of our family in sending us both condolences and meals. And I'm very disappointed of what I heard tonight from Dr. Ola. It's not a good time to take a pot shot at any member of our family. That's secondary to my first, which I do want you to know. No, we know who it was. We all know who he was talking about. And there was no time that Juan has ever been in that building and was disruptive. It is time to make that public. And he's going to have to, I'm not sure what Mr. Caruso meant when he said to ask the board chairman, but it's time to make all of that public while Mr. Ola is still here, so that it can't happen to anybody else for the rest of his tenure, because it's deplorable. And I think there'll be a lot of board members who will be shocked at what Mr. Ariola has had to endure at the hands of Dr. Ola in just trying to deliver our little grandson to school. That's all we ever tried to do. That's all we ever tried to do, is deliver him to school during an extremely difficult time.
I appreciate that you've been able to come to the meeting, because I know it's not been a long time. So thank you for your input. Are there any other comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to correspondence to the board. And I have 2 items of correspondence. Okay, the first one reads, Rose Bisson, Chair, Hampton Board of Ed, care of Hampton Elementary School, 580 Main Street, Hampton, Connecticut, 06247. Dear Mrs. Bisson, after working as the superintendent of the Hampton School District for the past 6 years, I have come to the decision that I will be retiring from my position as per the employment contract. Please accept this as my 90-day notice. My last day will be no later than July 29, 2022. I believe that I leave the Hampton School District with an excellent academic program. I have successfully addressed the directives that the Hampton Board of Education has given to the administration, reducing costs and never having any budget cost overruns, combining grades into multi-age teams, upgrading technology allowing for remote learning during COVID, managing the operational integrity of all of the building's infrastructure and systems, making the health and safety of our students and staff our top priority, modifying classrooms to allow for COVID protocols of 6 feet of separation and serving lunches in classrooms, working to add people who bring diversity to our staff currently with, 37.5% being people of color, adding more male figures to the staff with 5 men on staff serving as role models, concentrating on the involvement of parents, Hampton citizens, government officials, staff, and outside specialists by bringing them to the table when important decisions were being made during the COVID-19 pandemic. Proving for the most unique, individualized professional development activities anywhere in Connecticut for each certified staff member, as well as support staff. Providing positive experiences for all of our students, regardless of their educational needs, since each student has been given individualized instruction opportunities throughout their years at HES. I also believe that my most difficult and rewarding accomplishment was our very successful full reopening of HES during the 2020-2021 academic year. We were able to fully meet our goal, every student, every day for 183 days. This effort allowed our students to keep learning and achieving their academic, learning and achieving their academic skills. Remember that only 3% of all schools in Connecticut were able to reach this goal as reported by the Connecticut State Department of Education. I have come to realize on a very personal level, I need to end my 50+ years in education at this time in my life. This realization comes because of personal life changes, as well as the uncertainty of the future of HES, the ending of remote meetings, and the financial pressures that will continue to impact HES. HES has an exceptional team of administrators and support people. Sam is one of the most dedicated principals I have had the opportunity to supervise. Sally is a gem and has been the most outstanding business coordinator I have ever worked with in all of the 7 districts that I have been an administrator. Andy has also the knowledge to handle both the building's operational and mechanical aspects, and yet he can be the Mr. Andy that both parents and students respect. He has always stepped up to do whatever I asked of him. There is little more that I can say about Beverly than to say that she got us through COVID. Parents were always informed. The administrators were always given clear and factual advice in how best to handle the pandemic. I also know that the teachers, paraprofessionals, executive assistant, and all of our service providers are second to none. Our teachers will be fully trained in the implementation of the new special education regulations coming this fall. They have all earned my deepest respect. Finally, I thank you for the positive working relationship we have developed over these 6 years. I look forward to discussing with you how best I can serve HES and the board in my next few months. Sincerely yours, Dr. Frank Ola. And I have one more letter I need to read. Dear Dr. Ola and members of the Hampton Board of Education, please accept this letter as my official resignation from my position as art teacher for Hampton Elementary School. My final day of employment will be June 10, 2022. After much contemplation, I have made the decision to retire from a long and fruitful teaching career and focus my attention on my health and artistic pursuits. I have thoroughly enjoyed my time here and am honored to have had the chance to touch the lives of so many children. It has been as much a pleasure to learn from them as it has been to teach them. The creativity of their work has been an inspiration. Thank you so very much for the opportunity. Please let me know if you need any additional information and do not hesitate to reach out with questions. Sincerely, Rebecca J. Moore. Okay, those are all the correspondence I have. Dr. Ola, do you have any?
No.
Okay. In that case, we'll move on to approval of the minutes from 4/27/22 and 5/10/22. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes.
From both dates?
Yes.
Thank you, Diane. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, David. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. And we'll do it based on how you fall in on my computer. So we'll start with Mary Ellen.
Yes.
Anne.
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Matthew,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Juan,
Yes,
Diane,
Yes.
and Russ. I'm sorry, that was yes?
I abstain.
Oh, thank you. Okay, the motion carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with 7 yeses and 1 abstention. On to superintendent report. Dr. Ola?
Yeah, in the interest of time, my report was written on the 17th, even though it was for your this meeting. Does anybody have any specific question about the information that I supplied in my report?
I have one question, or we could do it under F&O. Any progress on the PA system?
Well, we spoke with Total Communications, and there is an ability to use the phone system as a PA system, and it's a simple software update. Tyler from EastCon has sent a VPN number to Total Communication, which allows them access remotely to make that update. In addition, we're going to update the backup, battery backup, so that the system will not go down at any point. Now, the question, excuse me, the question is whether or not we can, and we know we can't access in terms of a PA in the bathrooms, because obviously there are no phones in the bathrooms. So we're looking at another issue, and that is to find the manufacturing rep. And I think Yvonne has done an excellent job finding that person. And we have to find out when that person, and they haven't called us back, who can actually update the old equipment to see if it could actually work throughout the school hallway and bathrooms in case of a lockdown situation. Does that help you?
Yeah, does the sound come through the telephone or speakers?
It comes through the telephone speaker.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have one, Rose.
Yes, Juan?
For the superintendent, has he spoken to anybody from NAACP or anybody associated with race culture? Because that was one of the charges that he was given by you last meeting. And is this going to be done by the end of this term, school term?
The answer to your first question is I have not. And the second answer is obviously no.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to disagree with you, but didn't you find a workshop that you and I are going to be attending as a first step?
Yeah, he said NAACP. That's why I said
Oh,
no.
I don't think I asked you to contact the NAACP. I asked you to come up with a plan.
Yeah, Woodstock Academy has a 3-day seminar on minority recruitments, the 28th, 29th, and 30th of June. And myself and Rose have been registered. I haven't gotten any word back yet as to whether or not they've accepted our reservation, because we only have 2, and you're supposed to have teams of 4, but I told them how small we were, and we wouldn't have anybody. And they had us trying to set us up with, and I don't even know if it was Union or Thompson to be in that team. So I will have to get back to you in terms of whether or not we have a full complement.
Rose, originally this was supposed to set up as resolving retention, and second, to have the staff be aware that racism does exist and that it needs to be dealt with, because I see it. I've had it happen to me because of a racist attitude towards me. And I think it's time that the staff be told, hey, you guys have some racist views that you need to be aware of, or at least acknowledge that they do exist and they're among you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree. And before last meeting, I signed up with a CABE group that is dealing with just those subjects. And I even told them, again, before last board meeting, that our school had some needs, and I also wanted to look into how to handle them. So I hear you. It's not something we're going to do fast, because I want to make sure we do it right, but I am talking with professionals in the field, and I'm also getting training myself. So I want you to know this issue isn't going to be dropped. It's going to continue. It won't be done before Frank leaves, but it will get done.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions for Frank? Okay, let's move on to our Director of Special Services report. Shelley, oh, excuse me, Ms. McNulty.
Hi,
Rose,
everyone.
what about the principal report?
What about principal? Yeah.
Oh, I skipped right over it. I'm sorry. We'll
All
have
right.
Shelley go, and then we can have Sam.
All right, Sam, I'm going ahead of you. Sorry about that. All right, so just real quick, I want to let you know the SEDS, with this Connecticut SEDS data system, we have made a lot of progress. I believe we're ready and prepared for the transition that will happen come July 1. We wanted to make sure that we matched our electronic copy of the records with our paper copy and make sure everything was uploaded, downloaded, copied, printed. And so Diana Holmes and Laura Sorrell, I have to really compliment them on working and supporting me with getting that done. The other thing that goes along with that is we currently have a data system that's called Frontline IEP. Frontline IEP is a system that 99% of school districts currently use. And so they have been, typically we would have to renew that every year because they're losing a huge chunk of their money from Connecticut, because all of Connecticut's no longer going to need them. They aren't working with us, but they're not working with the directors in Connecticut. So they've essentially said, if you want to have access to your data, you need to pay 85% of the fee, even if you just want to be able to look at it and use it for next year, and have it be live where you can actually change. So one of the things that we do in special ed is when we do report cards, we do progress reports for the IEP goals and objectives, and that data we won't be able to update in the new system. So what I'll be doing this summer is printing out all those goals and objectives so we have hard copy to make sure that we can use the new system for this. It's a complicated process, but anyway, we're doing it that way. We only have we don't have very many students to be able to do it, but we'll be saving the district about 50% of what we currently pay for that fee. So that's something I'm excited about to be able to say. And then the other thing I wanted to just add in, and I put a little bit more detailed information in my report about least restrictive environment, as it was something that we were talking about last month, and asking about inclusion and independence and how we work with our students to be in their regular ed classroom as much as possible. So this is a little bit more about the legal parts of why we are required, but also how it's beneficial for our students as a whole. With the new system, the new IEP and the new data system for every child, who, you know, one of the bigger costs that we have in our budget is the number of paraprofessionals that we have. And what I want to say is least restrictive environment encompasses paraprofessionals as well. So the new IEP document is actually going to require the school to identify when and where we're using paraprofessionals for specific students and why that's necessary, and put goals and objectives on how we're going to diminish or lessen the number of hours of paraprofessional support our students require. So I just wanted to let you guys know that it's always something that's a conversation, but it is part of the legal pieces of IDEA. And so that's just a little bit background information in there that I gave you. Any questions?
I do, Russ Moffett.
Yeah.
Why would we want to reduce the hours of our paraprofessionals?
So it's not about reducing the hours of our paraprofessionals. It's about making sure our students are learning to be as independent as possible as they start to get older in the grades. So what often happens, and I see it, you know, with not just paraprofessionals, but just across the board, is we often do more for our students than they actually need us to do, because we want to help. You know, our paras are helpful, our teachers are helpful, we just want to help. So little things like when you come into school and unpacking your backpack, you know, when our paras take the backpack off of the child and then starts to empty out the backpack, you know, we could be teaching our students to be able to do that on their own. So we just want to make sure that we're making sure our kids are learning as much as they can to be as independent as possible. Not that we want to reduce the hours, but we want to say that our students are learning these skills. Does that answer your question? Or?
Have the paraprofessionals been of any assistance to you at all?
Yes, paraprofessionals are very, very helpful. So what you want to make sure you're doing is, as our kids are getting older, decreasing the need for the paraprofessional so that our paras can be available to really support our younger students who need that support in their process of learning. Does that make more sense to you?
Thank you very
yeah.
much.
It's a confusing process, and it's not to say that we don't want to have paraprofessionals or that we just want to make sure we're using our resources the best way that we can.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
I don't hear any. Thank you,
Okay.
Ms. McNulty.
Thank you.
Now we'll go back to Ms. Roberson. I'm so sorry I skipped over you.
Hello. Yes, I'm not muted. Okay. Lots of things are happening, even since I've written the report. The zoo, the transition to Parish Hill has a lot of components. The kids are going up, the sixth graders are going up tomorrow, and the sixth grade teachers and Shelley have met with the guidance counselors and the transitional team up at Parish Hill. So that's been happening. We're so excited. We're doing the Memorial Day parade, and everybody's hoping that there's no rain. And we're set for class night, and I'll send out an invite to everyone tomorrow so that they know the time. And I wrote up a little bit about the PBIS. Because of COVID, PBIS is our discipline procedure, and because of COVID, the cohorts weren't able to interact at all for a while, and as much, it's slowly happening again. And PBIS is really a school-wide program. So we just did a very helpful workshop. And when we meet at the end of the year, we'll get that program up and running more comprehensively for the beginning of in August.
So does that mean that you all weren't handing out paws for the children this year?
Yes, but not to the extent. We had monthly assemblies where each team would highlight one of the core values and either do a presentation or show some artwork that they had done on one of the core values. And we couldn't get together for that. So and we weren't together for lunch, and a lot of lunch and recess, a lot of paws were given out by anyone that was in the cafeteria. So the paws are happening, but it's in the classroom. But it's starting to expand out there. We're doing more things together.
Great, thank you. I found that to be the most interesting part of your report, the write-up about the convention, the PBIS convention.
Yeah, it was a good feeling to get back out there and be with, like, in a room with 300 other people.
Yeah. Juan, you have a question?
Yes, I know what PBIS means, but maybe the rest of the board would like to know.
Well, I think it's in the report, isn't it?
It's a positive behavior intervention for school climate and discipline.
Oh, here. Nope, it's not there. I'm sorry. Thank you, Juan.
You're welcome.
I knew it, so.
Yeah. It's statewide. We're not the only ones that use it, so.
So when I first learned about it, it was just coming to Connecticut, and I learned it was all over the country, that school districts all over the country are doing it.
Yeah.
Not everyone, but some. Yeah.
Well, we were lucky because it was spearheaded at UConn. George Segal and a lot of the research, and so we got a lot of exposure when we got certified as a PBIS school. The monies have since dwindled away, and they just have the yearly updates. But I think it's only Linda and myself that were in the initial training, which was a 3-year training program.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? Then we will move on, and I won't skip anyone. I will carefully check the agenda to the business coordinator's report. Mrs. LaHoo?
Good evening, everyone. Does anyone have questions for me?
Not so much a question, but I wanted to thank you for describing the special ed grants. That was really good information to have.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think it was very informative. Thank you.
And I'm shocked at how little funding we get. I mean, it added up to 33,000. Well, 33,000, 34. It wasn't much. Wait, 100, not the, no, it is 1,000. Yep. No, 23,000, 24,000. I'm sorry. That IDA 619 grant is only for 1,400. So I was shocked. Because I remember, as Nick Caruso referenced, I remember when the federal government said they'd pay 40% of all special ed costs, and that's nowhere near it.
No, it's not.
It's not even close. And and when he started talking about the unfunded mandates, I'm just going to add that there are so many different things that are happening. Luckily, you guys only go up to 6th grade, but the way the state of Connecticut has changed things, they've even changed it so that we're now supporting students until their 22nd birthday, as well as covering residential costs. But like I said, luckily your students are younger, and so that doesn't impact your board, but there is not enough money out there for all the mandates and expectations they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sally, thank you for all your hard work. You do a good job.
Thank you, Russ.
Yeah, I second that.
Thank you.
And I would just say, Sally, thank you for doing the IDA grant, because it's horribly difficult and challenging, and it's a lot of information you have to collect. So I want to say thank you too.
You're welcome.
Well done, Sally. That's Ann speaking.
Thanks, Ann. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. And we'll go to discussion and possible action on acceptance of Dr. Ola's letter of resignation. Do we have?
Oh, I can move if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I move that we accept Dr. Ola's resignation with gratitude for his hard work and dedication to the Hampton Elementary School over the last 6 years.
I'll second
I'll
it.
second.
Yeah, I heard David first.
And I might add best wishes to you in the future, Frank.
Thank you.
So any further discussion? I'm going to call the roll again in the order that you used to show up on my computer. When different people talk, it moves, but we'll do Mary Ellen,
Yes.
Anne,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Matthew,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Juan.
Whoops, sorry.
Yes.
Try again.
Diane? Yes. And Russ?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Frank. I'm sorry to see you go. I know that you're the only one who managed to implement multi-age grouping, and we tried for a long time. So thank you for that. I just want to say, one of the things Nick Caruso showed us was that the state law says we have to have a superintendent. So we're going to have to do a search process. And I'm wondering if anyone has any ideas how they'd like to see that process go. Hearing none.
Well, I think, Rose, I think in the past, we've tried to get somebody from the school, maybe and somebody from the town, just maybe a citizen, but then also maybe a parent. You know, I think having a robust group of people that maybe have different perspectives would be important. And I think that worked. And I think that's how it was developed the last time as well. So I don't know how feasible that is in this day and age, but it's, you know, I thought it provided, you know, multiple different candidates last time, and, you know.
Yeah. Why don't we advertise like we did last time and see how many candidates we get? And depending on how many candidates, we can determine how many layers we need to have of interviews. And that will help us with deciding where each person, where each group that you mentioned is represented in our interviews. How's that?
That's fine. I have something that I would like to ask Frank that he may do.
Mhm.
Formulate a list of questions that he thought would be advantageous for us as a group of, the town of Hampton to ask questions about what, when we do an interview. I think that would be a good idea if he could do that. I don't know if he's open to it or not, but it would be helpful.
Or if he'd have the time in the,
Exactly, yes.
yeah. Maybe you could think about it, Frank, and then talk with us, so you don't have to sit down and write out anything.
I certainly can do that. I just don't know what your process is going to be. If you want that to be part of the process so that you have questions for the candidates, I certainly can help either with you, Rose. I'll sit down with our a Zoom meeting or something like that. Certainly. If I can help, I will.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Rose,
Yes, Mary Ellen?
Ann was saying something. Go ahead, Ann.
Well, I was saying that we probably wouldn't really use a search service, but I don't think it would hurt to have a little familiarity with some of the elements that they use, like community conversations or eliciting input from the community. Because I think even if you just look at some of our neighboring districts who have employed search services, which I'm not suggesting we do, but if we look at some of those features, we might get some good ideas.
To be honest, I'm concerned we're not going to have a lot of applicants. So I'm not thinking we're going to need a whole long process. If we had a full-time position, we probably would have plenty of applicants. But right now, as Nick Caruso said, people don't want to be superintendent with the way it is. So I'd like to suggest that we add, I'd like to suggest that we advertise, and when we know the scope of what we need, we can make plans then, if that's okay.
Sure.
I also want to say, sort of piggybacking on what Russ said, EastCon's currently undergoing the process of looking for a new executive director. And one of the first steps they took was to ask the people working within EastCon for feedback on the attributes that they'd like to see. So perhaps that could be done with our administrative staff and also teachers, parents, to come up with some sort of a checklist that could be done online.
Okay. Great. Should we get a committee together? Should we have an ad hoc committee whose purpose is to search for the superintendent and to develop a plan for the search? Oh, Juan, I saw your hand up. It came down, but I want you to know I did see it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I was just maybe the possibility of hiring a principal superintendent. So that's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, Mary Ellen, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you didn't. I was done. Thank you. But I would volunteer to be on a committee.
Is there anyone else?
Couple of superintendents back, I was on the committee.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to be on the committee?
I might be available, but I can't guarantee it.
Okay, so you might want to be on the committee. Anyone else?
I could help out if needed, Rose.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, and I'll be on it. So that gives us 4. We're short of a quorum, which is a good thing. Thank you all. The first thing I think we'll get on, though, is putting the ad on REAP. I don't know if that's enough, but definitely we want to do REAP is the Connecticut State Department of Education's list of open positions. And I know if you want a position in Connecticut, that's the first place to go looking.
Excuse me, Rose, I think last time we advertised at CAPS also.
Oh, that'd be great. So we'll get together the ad and then advertise there too. I know you're going to send me a copy of the old one, the last one we used.
I think I did yesterday.
You did yesterday. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't see it at all and I looked for it, so I'll look again.
Please do.
Yeah, and we'll get that going fast. But we do have a 0.4 superintendent, so it's less than half time, so I'm a little nervous about it. Okay, is there anything else? Any further discussion?
Do we as a board vote on this new superintendent?
Absolutely. The board has the final choice.
Okay. I think it would be good to have an outsider just,
I don't think we have a certified insider, so I suspect an outsider it's going to be.
that is good.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to discussion and possible action on the charge of the Minority Recruitment and Retention Committee. So I apologize. I thought I had sent it out earlier, but then when I went to look for my sent email, I didn't see it. So I sent it out again today, but the only change on what I sent out today was that we added the words and retention. Yeah. Does the charge look adequate to people?
Rose, part of the problem, excuse me, but it doesn't deal anything with retention part of it. And there's nothing about professional development or an appeals process for that minority person, whoever that person might be, and mechanisms to check the climate of the building and see if the staff is basically being appropriate.
Okay, so I want to go back to something Nick Caruso said today, that we have to say, let there be light. We don't have to screw in the light bulb. So the charge that was given for the committee would be what the committee would do, and then they would make recommendations to the superintendent. So the committee could make recommendations for all the things that you just listed, but the committee wouldn't do those things.
That's true, but that doesn't say it in the charge.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But it is the charge that was recommended by the lawyer. So I kind of don't want to think I know more than the lawyer on what a committee charge should be. Is there anyone else who wants to comment?
Well, I do, Russ Moffett. I always think it's a good idea to question the lawyer and have him explain to you where he's coming from, because they're not God. I understand that they're taught and they have ample supply of information that we don't have, but I don't think it's a bad idea to ask them and explain to you.
Well, okay. Juan, will you write down the things that you were concerned weren't in it, and I will bring it to her? Jessica Ritter is our lawyer.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. That's a good idea.
Okay. You're welcome, Russ. It was basically your idea.
You went through with it. You thought you thought it was right.
Okay, great. So we won't pass this tonight. So Juan, my understanding from what you said at our last meeting was that you were not going to do anything on this committee until we met some of requirements that you laid out. did I understand that correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to remove you from the committee because I think we need to have people who are willing to work to get us there. Not refuse to do anything because we're not already there. So that leads me to ask Diane. Diane, do you still want to be on the committee?
Which committee is this?
This is the Minority Recruitment and Retention Committee.
Sure.
Okay, so Diane and I are the two who are on the committee. If there's anyone who would like to do the work that we need to do to meet WAN standards, let me know and we can advance the, we can enlarge the committee. I'll call a meeting, Diane.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, oh, I'll send you a memo appointing you to the committee and I'll call a meeting.
Yeah, please send it to my email, not my regular email, not the school email.
When I send.
I'm
to
still
both.
not getting anything from that.
I send, anytime I send anything, I put both your emails there. So
Okay,
you should
good.
be getting emails from me.
Okay.
Great. Okay, we'll move on to discussion and possible reactivation of the ad hoc job description committee.
We already did that, remember, Rose?
Oh, sorry, we did that last time. Mary Ellen and I are on the committee and and the superintendent is on the committee and we invite the person that, or the people that the job description pertains to, and they also sit on the committee. Okay, let's go on to committee and liaison reports. I don't think I saw an agenda for communications, so I'm guessing communications didn't meet,
Correct.
but finance and operations met. Mark?
Yeah, sorry, my internet is a little spotty tonight, so I don't have a camera, but
Oh, okay.
anyway, we did meet last Thursday. We went over the parking lot. Paving will commence on the week of June 13th, and we talked to the Board of Finance, and they authorized the funds to use the capital non-recurring for costs that go over the 143 and change that are in the municipal fund. So that project's moving forward. We've also been trying to get the details, and Alan Cahill helped us out, get the details for the school to an engineering firm to continue looking at mini splits and that system that could be implemented at the school to offset fuel costs. And finally, well, there's multiple other things going on, but one of the big things is that playscapes have been ordered and will be in here by June. So that's great that that project will be able to move forward still too. So, and a lot of thanks to Dr. Oler for having help working together to get a lot of that stuff done. So.
Mark, can I add?
Of course.
We got acknowledgement from the engineering firm today that they received the building plans and we'll be looking at them.
Oh, good.
And the last ones they needed, the electrical and HVAC. So that's good.
Great.
Good.
Rose?
Yes.
Another piece of information from FNO.
Uh-huh.
I do think, Mark, didn't I send you an email about the arsenic tank, the second arsenic tank that has to be addressed?
Yeah, you did. I thought I had shared enough, so in your interest of time, I didn't bring it up. But yes, they assessed the second arsenic tank. It has to be replaced, so we're working through that. And I'm guessing that has to be done this year.
Yes.
Meaning before June 30th?
Yes.
Wow.
They can't do it during school. The whole point of this is they can't do it during school because they have to shut down the entire water system to replace all the chemicals in that. They're huge tanks, and there are two of them. They did one last year. They have to do the second one this year, and they keep that sequence, but they won't have to do the next sequence of the first tank for another 2 years. So that has to be done. because we're a public water supply system. And we do have the budget money. We had budgeted for that.
Thank you.
So we're
Okay.
replacing the tank or just the contents?
No, just the chemicals inside the tank.
The contents, okay.
Okay, did policies committee meet?
The policy committee meeting has not met, but I've been trying to follow the state initiatives. And hopefully in the summertime, we can do some catching up.
Okay, thank you. The ad hoc job description committee has not met. We'll have to get on that. And the ad hoc minority recruitment and retention subcommittee has not met. And the ad hoc superintendent's evaluation subcommittee has not met. CABE, Ann, do you have a report from CABE?
I do. I attended the board of directors meeting that was focused on hiring of the new director. And sorry, I'm losing my voice here. So Patrice McCarthy has been recommended and accepted as the new executive director. And Patrice has the highest duration of longevity in her role as deputy director. So she's been there for, I think, 37 years. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, it was very exciting. And there was lively discussion.
When does she
So does
start?
anybody have- What?
When does Patrice start her new position?
I believe it's July 1st, but don't quote me on that.
Okay, thank you. All right, should we move on to EastCon?
Yeah, we had our annual meeting last night, but we're going to have another one in June because we're working on required policies. And there's an active search right now for a new executive director, and there's business to do regarding that. So we will be meeting over the summer. Yeah, that's about it.
Okay, thanks. The Hampton, Scotland discussions. The programming committee is working on the budget still, and we're having trouble coming up with a meeting date when there's 4 of us on the committee and we're still having trouble coming up with meeting dates, but we're going to meet this Friday. And there hasn't been a governance meeting. We were going to have one and then it was canceled, and I haven't heard any more about having another. So we will still need to have another one of those. I just don't know when. So we can go on to additions to the agenda. Does anyone want to add anything to tonight's agenda?
Do we need to add acceptance of the resignation of the art teacher with appreciation?
Well, I think that's a good idea. Is there anything else?
Are we going to be replacing her?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Are we advertising for one?
Well, we certainly haven't done it yet, but we will have to advertise. We'll have to go on REAP again. We still have the same problem. It's a part-time position. I think last time the person we hired didn't come through REAP, so I'll talk with the superintendent about how we can get applicants. Are there any other suggestions for addition to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, can we have a motion to add acceptance of the art teachers, Mrs. Moran's resignation?
So
Motion.
moved.
Second.
Okay. Okay, so Mary Ellen and then Diane. We will quickly go through the list. Mary Ellen,
Yes.
Anne,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Matthew,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Juan,
Yes,
Diane,
Yes.
and Russ.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously. So do we have a motion to accept? I'm sorry, I forgot her first name.
Rebecca.
Rebecca Moran's resignation as art teacher
So moved.
with, I'm sorry, Mary Ellen, did you say acceptance with appreciation?
Yes, I
Yeah.
did. So,
Does with appreciation work for you, Diane?
Sure.
Okay, with appreciation for the time she's served the HES community. Do we have a second?
I'll second it, Anne.
Anne, thank you, Anne. Okay, we'll go through the list again. Mary Ellen,
yes.
Anne,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Matthew,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Juan,
yes,
Diane,
Yes.
and Russ.
Yes.
Thank you. The
All right,
motion-
can I ask who motioned that? I got the second.
Okay, it was Mary Ellen and then Diane
No.
second.
Now, for that
No.
one, it was Diane moved and Ann second.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you. And that should be item 14A. I didn't say that. Okay. Is there anything people would like to see on our next agenda? If you think of something, oh,
Rose, sorry.
it's okay.
Oh,
You
just
have-
Mark Becker. Do we need to act or do anything based on the Board of Finance update to our proposed budget?
Well, you know what? We passed a budget and the Board of Finance changed it. And so my opinion is we should wait. It could get changed again. I think we should wait and decide after it's been passed by the town.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay.
Rose,
Yes, Juan.
Matthew's taking the minutes because Dana's been doing the minutes all along the meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Dana, and thank you, Matthew.
Can I ask
Well,
a question?
I have a question. Are we paying two people to do this or what?
We never pay Matthew, so
Okay,
we would not be paying two people.
okay. Are
If
we
you're a
paying?
board, if you're a
Oh.
Board of Ed member, you may not be in a paid position under the Board of Ed.
Okay, so are we paying one person then?
Yeah, it sounds like we're paying one person.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Did someone else have something?
Yeah, Rose, I had forgotten, we didn't add it to the agenda, but I was not able to go to the Board of Finance meeting. Can somebody please explain what happened to the budget that we proposed?
Mark, would you like to do that?
Sure. So basically, the decision for the Board of Finance was that I'll say it this way, their decision was that we take $10,000 out of our budget under the fuel cost / oil line and take it from our budget and put it into the contingency line of the general town budget. And that's primarily to keep MBR at a certain level.
Okay, so does that mean if we have to take money out of the contingency line that it goes back into our estimated expenses?
Yes.
Or,
Yep. Yeah, if we need that money for fuel, we would have to go to the Board of Finance and work with them to get it into, and then we would, and it would end up adding to our budget.
Yeah.
And count for the total budget for that school year.
has anybody asked if that's allowed to be done by whoever is in control of budgets or who reviews budgets? I've
Um,
never
We
heard
have
of,
to ask, it is allowed.
It's allowed.
it
yeah.
is, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Okay,
Okay. I'm going to move on to audience for citizens and staff. Is there, and again, I'm going to ask people to hold their comments to 2 minutes. Is there anyone who would like to say anything? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
So
Second,
Mark and Diane, okay. We are going to go down the list. Mary Ellen,
yes.
Anne,
yes.
David,
Yes.
Matthew,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Juan,
Yes.
Diane,
yes.
Russ.
Yes.
Okay, we are adjourning as of 9:14 PM. Thank you all. That was a
Long meeting,
long meeting with lots of thinking in it. Yeah.
yes.